Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
The topic of today's discussion is the effects of spiritual awakening. And I wanted to talk about the effects of spiritual awakening because so many people are more focused on the symptoms. Like, oh, I'm getting headaches, or I'm waking up in the middle of the night, or I'm crying for no reason, and whatnot, which could be the symptoms of spiritual awakening, but also could be a mental health disorder. So we have to be aware of what it is and where that stems from. I figured today would be nice to talk about some of the benefits, the effects, what happens while you're going through the awakening process. And when you, I like to think of them as like layers. When you pop through a different layer, new effects begin to happen. So today we are going to be speaking about the effects of spiritual awakening. And the first thing that I want to talk about, which is probably one of the first things that happen to all of us when we begin to go through this awakening process, is we get a greater intensified perception. And that can happen in one of two ways. One of the ways, the more happy way, there are two ways. I unfortunately have the more negative one, but there is a happy one. And the happy one is when you become more aware of just everything around you. You begin to notice colors better. Actually, that happens also. You begin to see colors. You begin to smell more. Your whole perception intensifies. Not to repeat myself, but things become more vivid. I remember saying that when I went through my second half of my awakening, which was, 15 years ago, I guess, the early 2000s, that I remember saying, I haven't felt this good since I was 15. Meanwhile, I was 40. And just to have that, like, I don't want to say childlike innocence, but more like a anything is possible feeling, like that weight is lifted, and all of a sudden you're feeling better. You begin to have this new awareness and a childlike wonder. We begin to see all the little details in life, all the the shapes of leaves, or the paint color in your house. You realize that it's mauve instead of pink, or little subtle things become more pronounced and rise to the surface. And on the flip side of that, for many of us, we also become aware of the illusion, for lack of a better term. And what I mean by the illusion, we start to realize that society is a construct, that it's not this end-all thing, and marketing and PR and all, the media, and we realize how we've been affected or how we've been manipulated. A lot of us begin to see a lot of the corruption come to the surface. And I mean, we're seeing that now with humanity as a whole. And actually, that's a good thing. People don't like the political climate. I think it's a good thing that all this ugliness is coming up, because it shows to me that humanity as a whole, a collective, quote unquote, a collective evolution, trademark to Joe Martino, but there is a collective evolution happening, and we're all experiencing this intensified perception. The most important thing that I have to say in reference to the ugly part of it, yay, embrace the prettier flowers, embrace the prettier colors, embrace your childlike wonder, But as far as the other stuff, the outside stuff, you can't take that personally. We can see it, we can call it what it is, we can call it out for what it is, but let's do our best not to let it affect our joy, not to affect our happiness and our inner peace. But anyway, that is one of the effects. We begin to have an intensified perception of the world around us and the subtleties of life in general, positive and negative. And the one thing I do suggest is this would be the point where you would say to yourself, okay, I need to learn how to ground myself. I need to learn how to remain centered and to remain focused, so I'm not, ooh, there's a squirrel, not getting distracted by all the pretty things or the shiny things or the ugly things, for that matter, getting outraged and angry all the time about the ugly things. We live in a world of duality and polarity. There's positive, there's negative, there's good, and there's bad. Another thing that begins to happen to us is, and this is probably one of the most exciting things, if you can get to this place. Now, when I'm talking about the effects of spiritual awakening, I kind of want to throw in there symptoms as well as goals, something to work toward if you're not experiencing that. And one of those is timelessness. And what I mean by timelessness is we begin to get out of our head, out of our minds. No, not going crazy out of our mind. We get out of our head, we get out of the story in our head, and we become more present. And by becoming more present, we have less concern and less worry about the past. We have less concern, we have less worry about what the future has to hold. We begin to live in a state of mindfulness. And while that may come naturally to some people as you're going through the spiritual awakening process, unfortunately, the way the illusion is created, you can see it all around you. People are constantly living in their heads. I was having a discussion with a gentleman yesterday. I'm going to the grocery store and I bumped into a fellow intellectual and we were talking about mindfulness, and I was telling him how, I was thinking how it doesn't matter where you live. People drive horribly everywhere. I lived in South Florida. Everyone blamed the immigrants. I moved here to Roanoke, Virginia. I blame everybody on the fact that they're not being mindful. And it's true. We have become, even those of us on the spiritual path, one of the things that are missing in the spiritual path is the how-to. We're getting all the knowledge, and what happens is we become spiritual intellectuals, or as I like to call it, book witches. You read all the books, you take all the courses, but you're not applying it day to day, moment to moment. And one of the goals, or one of the effects of spiritual awakening, is the ability to be here now. I know that sounds like a cliche, but it's the truth. Mindfulness is one of the most wonderful, wonderful feelings, experiences, and effects of spiritual awakening. It is through my mindfulness, by being here now, that I allow myself to be in tune with my higher self. If we are too busy living in our head, thinking about the thoughts of yesterday, of what we need to do tomorrow, of being embarrassed of something we did 20 years ago, or being concerned of what's going to happen at the event you're going to next week, we're not here. We're not here now. And if we are caught in that illusion, it is illusory, because it's just a thought, it's not real. If we are caught in that illusory thought process, we lose this moment, first of all, and we can't connect with our higher self because we're too busy intellectualizing. So one of the effects, one of the symptoms, and one of the goals is the increased presentness, the timelessness, that it doesn't matter. The time does not matter on this level of awareness and thinking. Yeah, of course, we have things to do, and we have a job, or we have goals or whatnot. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the ability to experience timelessness. And what I mean by that is to be here now. Get out of your head. Come back to the present. Another of the effects that are one of the great aspects of spiritual awakening is the sense of a greater presence. Through many people, their third eye opens up. They begin to feel energies. They begin to feel spirit guides. They begin to feel or begin to sense otherworldly entities or whatnot. But on a more I don't want to say lower level, on a smaller scale, we just begin to sense life around us. A great example of this is when you go on a hike, or you go to the woods, or you go on the top of the mountain, or whatever. You can begin to feel the difference of the energy. You notice energetic changes, subtle energetic changes. Our subtle energy feelers or receivers become more heightened. So we can sense, and by the way, there's something positive and negative about that, because as our senses our energetic senses become more heightened, we have a tendency to become more empathetic, which is a good thing, but we also begin to draw in other people's energies and believe that they're ours, and we begin to identify with them as if it's ours. You walk into a room of angry people, you become angry. You're watching an angry TV show or a news show or listening to a political radio show, you begin to feel their feelings and you begin to take ownership of them when they're not yours. But again, on the positive aspect, we begin to sense the energy of life around us, of nature, of trees. That's why I say it's very, very important as you're going through this process to make the time to go into nature, to get out of this matrix, grid, illusion, oppressive consciousness, oppressive energy that we have in our cities and our towns. It doesn't matter if it's a big town or a little town. I mean, Roanoke's a small, tiny city, but it's still got city energy. Thank goodness I have nature, 5 minutes away. I can go up to the top of the mountain if I want to. But even if you live in a big city, I mean, New York, I've been to Central Park. I love Central Park. It's a perfect place to get out of that grid matrix mentality. But give yourself the ability to sense nature and life around you. Again, this is one of the positive things that begin to happen, is our ability to sense a greater presence. We begin to acknowledge, whether you're religious or not. I don't consider myself religious, but we have the ability to acknowledge a higher consciousness. You call it source, call it God. You have the sense of awe of something greater. You begin to sense the size of you in reference to your city, in reference to your country, in reference to your planet, in reference to the solar system, in reference to the Milky Way galaxy, in reference to the entire universe. Our awareness begins to expand. We sense that awe, that greater energy that is around, that greater than us perception begins to be enhanced. And if you don't have that yet, by all means, follow my suggestion. Go out into the woods. Look at, go somewhere where you can see the stars outside at night. If you have light pollution, take a ride to the country. We used to, when I lived in South Florida, we would literally drive into the Everglades at night just to be able to see the stars, and that was a treat in itself. But you get that sense of awe again. You get that connection to something greater, that there is something bigger that we are a part of. Another one of the aspects that we feel, one of the effects that we feel in our spiritual awakening, again, I'm calling them symptoms, goals, and effects, is the aliveness, the harmony, and the connectedness. One of the signs that we feel during our awakening, or one of the goals or the effects, is that we do begin to feel alive. We begin to sense our bodies more. There's no such thing as an innate object. We begin to understand that everything is energy. It's almost prior to what I was saying, I was talking about the bigger and the greater. This sense of aliveness is the sense of aliveness in everything on the smaller scale. As above, so below. On a quantum level, we begin to understand that this bottle, this water bottle, which I need some, the water bottle is made of molecules, and the molecules have atoms, and inside the atoms there's energy. Everything is energy, no matter how solid it is. That the solidity itself is an illusion. So we begin to have that greater or more microscopic, for lack of a better term, awareness of all things, that nothing is really dead. Everything has life, even if it's just energetically speaking. On that level, it does have life. Let me share a little bit here from my notes. Even natural phenomena that aren't biologically alive, such as clouds, seas, stones, and man-made objects, such as pieces of furniture or buildings, shine with the radiant aliveness of spirit. Objects that are biologically alive become more powerfully animate. One spiritually awake woman described how everything looked and felt ultra real and alive. I kept staring out the window and just marveling. I could almost see the atoms in everything I looked at. Kind of reminds me of my shamanic vision quest, but if you've ever been on one, you know what I mean. Everything is moving, and it's on a certain vibration, on a certain level. The spiritual energy pervades all things, and so creates a sense of connectedness, a sense of oneness with everything, because we're all made up of that same life force energy. Call it chi, call it quantum particles, call them quarks, whatever it is that works for you. We are all made of that. Everything. You, me, the stars, the universe, the table, the kitty, everything. So this spiritual energy underlies and pervades all things. This creates a sense of connectedness, of oneness. An awakened person may have the sense that the boundaries between superficially separate and distinct objects have melted away. They may still sense what some might describe as the oneness of everything and the oneness of the universe. So at this point, what begins to happen, and again, it's different for everyone, different levels of awakening, different focus, different speed of awakening. We begin to change on the inside as well as the outside. It may not seem like it because you're still in the same physical body, you're still looking, well, you might still look the same to yourself in the mirror or whatnot, but things do begin to change. When you become, when you start feeling and sensing and living these, I don't want to know if we want to call them goals, but these effects, when these effects become a day-to-day part of your life, we do begin to change on the inside. Our inner biology even changes. If you know anything about what stress does to the body, or what love does to the body, or meditation does to the body, how it affects us down to a cellular level, we may not be able to see it, but we are beginning to change on the inside. Many people talk about looking younger, having more energy. Many people talk about not having more energy. I'm one of those people. We begin to feel like the energy is moving so rapidly through us that we burn it up very quickly. So we have to be aware of that. So what happens there is eventually our diet begins to change. Hopefully we start becoming more attracted to healthier, more nutritious foods, and doing things that are less harmful. As well, what happens on the inside is our emotional maturity begins to blossom. On the inside, before we have the effects of spiritual awakening, before we have the effects of mindfulness, before we have the effects of enhanced and intensified perception, we were basically emotionally mature to the level of our experience. And again, that could be different for many different people. You could be a 20-year-old with the emotional maturity of a 70-year-old, or you can be a 50-year-old with the emotional maturity of a 14-year-old. I've seen both. But that's what we are. We are basically, I don't want to say victim to that, but due to those circumstances, that's about where our emotional maturity level is. When we begin to transform, when we begin to, again, have this intensified perception and the inner workings begin to change, our chemical makeup begins to change, our brain frequency begins to change, our neural pathways, our neurotransmitters begin to change. And one of the greatest things that we learn in this, in the awareness of being one with everything, or being aware that we are connected, a certain emotional maturity begins to manifest. So our reaction to things begins to change. Our emotional reaction begins to change. We're not so easily offended. We're not so easily, how shall we say? I shouldn't say that, because we do become very sensitive. We may become sensitive, but I will say our reaction begins to change, might be a better way of saying it. We begin to notice what our reactions are. And we're at a commercial break. So I'll continue talking about this topic when we come back right after this break.
And now, back to your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Emotional maturity gives us the clarity to see our behavior. And I don't mean that in the sense of being overly critical. Now, are we overly critical of ourselves? Sometimes. I'm sure many of us. I always joke around, I'm my worst boss I've ever had. I'm like, you have to do more, you have to do more. But again, being aware of that in itself is having the ability to observe our behavior and to observe the way that we react to things on an emotional level. So what happens is eventually we begin to see what we don't like. And when we do see, and that's one of the things about contrast, I must say, when you see what you don't like, at least now you know you don't like it. And sometimes we have to experience what we don't like in order to be guided in the direction of something that we do like, whether it be individually, as a country, as a globe, as a universe. But on this level, on the emotional level, we have the ability to change our behavior, to change our reaction. One of the things that I've taught myself over the years, and I highly suggest this to everyone, is that when you find yourself beginning to have that, you feel that old reaction coming up. You know, let's say, oh, I don't know, you have bad relationships and you feel that argument coming on. Do nothing. Don't react. It is better to sit and do nothing, wait for that wave of emotion to leave us, and to have some clarity and be proactive. Emotional maturity gives us the ability to be proactive. In other words, coming from a sense of well-being and what is best for all those involved, versus being negatively reactive. So give yourself the opportunity to just not act if you feel an old, unhealthy reaction bubbling up to the surface. And again, one of the effects of spiritual awakening, emotional maturity. As we move on our path, as we move into, again, our expansive awareness, our expanded spiritual connectedness with all things, we begin to sense quiet. Now, people are like, what do you mean you get quiet? I love quiet. What do I mean by that? I'm not one of these people that like to have the TV on all the time. I'm not one of these people that like to have the radio on in the background all the time. What happens to us is our body, because we become sensitive, one of the positive things about being sensitive is that overstimulation from the external, whether it be loud music, whether it be video games, whether it be phone notifications. I've turned them all off. I have nothing. I don't even know when somebody calls me. I pick it up and look, and I'll get to it when I get to it. I'm not reactive to the environment. Most of us, when we begin to evolve at this level, having that emotional maturity, we understand that we are constantly being bombarded by advertising, by television, by music, by our telephones, by our computers. we begin to become vigilant as to what we allow into our senses. And what happens is our mind becomes more quiet. That mental chatter begins to, the volume gets lower and lower on that mental chatter. That's not to say that we're all walking around blissful all the time. It's not to say that we don't have our own, old wounds that come up to the surface and torture us. We've all had positive and negative experiences. What it is to say is that we can enjoy the quiet. I know many people out there and here and everywhere that cannot have quiet. They gotta constantly be doing something. They can't sit with themselves. And when you can't sit with yourself, I mean, for me, that's an obvious sign that you don't like yourself, or that you don't like this feeling, or can't embrace and accept this moment. And if we can't accept this moment, then where are we going? What kind of life is that? What kind of life is that? So having the ability to sit with oneself is a effect/goal, effect/symptom of the spiritual awakening journey. Allowing quiet to happen, being aware of that quiet time, allowing that mental chatter to just dissipate, let the volume lower. It is a part of our human nature to have what, the Buddhist, I believe is a book by Sogyal Rinpoche, I hope I said his name right. He wrote a book called, and by the way, I highly recommend it, it's called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Not the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is called The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And in that book, he talks about the monkey mind, and how our mind, because of the way that we're brought up in this world, our mind goes from one thought to the next thought, to the next thought, to the next thought. Maybe not always racing, but always busy, always grasping toward that next thought, toward that next, I don't know if you want to call it a goal, but it's almost like a, how shall I say it? Like wanting some kind of satisfaction from the next thought, for lack of a better term. I call it mental masturbation, and I can go into a whole thing about that. Actually, I'll share it with you. It's a little risque, but back when I was in my 20s, I was having a lot of anxiety, and I think this was right before my spiritual awakening, quite honestly. And I was going to a psychologist, and he did this. And please, if you can't see it, I'll explain it. He did this, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" Basically, I'm gesturing, holding something in my hand and putting it in my ear. And he said, "You're holding a sexual toy, for lack of a better term." He goes, "Stop mind blanking yourself." Mind screwing yourself. I'm going to try to be PG-13 here. And that's exactly what it is. It's mental masturbation, keeping going and going, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing, because we don't feel happy with where we are at that moment. So allow yourself the goal, or if you are having the effect of quietness, enjoy that quietness. There's nothing wrong with quiet. There's nothing wrong with nothing going on in your mind. Meditation is a great way to practice that. I'm not going to go into meditation today too much, but take a few deep breaths. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and everything begins to get quiet. Be aware of what you're exposing your senses to. One of the effects is being aware of the chatter outside and within, and choosing, maybe almost intuitively choosing that silence, that quiet. Another one of the wonderful effects that happen to us is our empathy and our compassion begins to expand. Whereas in the past we had been maybe, before we were awakened, pre-awakened, I'll say. I'm not going to say unawakened. I believe everyone is awakened to an extent, and I believe everyone is on that path. But let's just say pre-awakened. Before the awakening began to happen, we were very self-centered. Many of us are very self-centered. I know I was. Very much about me, what's in it for me, how, what am I getting out of it? I remember when I was training to be a speaker, when I was working for actually a good corporation. I actually still like them. I'm not going to advertise them, but if you all know me, you know what I used to do, and I was an instructor. And one of the things they always tell me, they're like, always tell them, give them a whiff 'em. What's in it for them? Everybody wants a what's in it for them. And that's where we come from. We're almost like programmed to what's in it for me? What's in it for me? And what happens is our empathy begins to expand. And again, this can be something positive or something negative if we begin to identify with someone else's emotions and take ownership of them. That's not a healthy thing. So be aware of that. On the positive side, being at one with someone's emotion. If, let's say, a friend is coming to you and they're having a crisis or something like that, that you are attentive and you are in it with them to, help them understand it, and you can feel what they're going through, and perhaps that might give you a little more clarity on how you might be able to help your friend or a family member or whatnot. That's a positive thing. It's not a positive thing if they're always like that, but then you have to make a decision to cut them out of your life. However, compassion and empathy is a wonderful effect and a goal if you don't have it. As well, we begin to, because we have this compassion, because we have this empathy, and because we have a more higher, intense perception of everything, we begin to have an overall sense of well-being. And what does that mean? What does an overall sense of well-being mean, and where does it come from? I can only share with you what has happened with me. So from my perspective, that overall sense of well-being came when, and forgive me if I sound fluffy, I'm going to sound fluffy here, is when I finally surrendered to Source. I don't want to say God, I don't want to say Goddess, actually I don't even want to say Source. I began to trust the universe. I began to trust the process that, I don't want to say that everything happened for a reason, or that it was fated for me to do this work and to be happy or whatnot. It's not about that, because of course I do believe that we are the masters of our reality. We are the co-creators of our life. But more of a sense of inner peace, knowing that it's going to be okay. That always knowing that no matter how hard things get, either time will heal that wound, or a change of perception will heal that crisis. We're always going to be okay. We begin to know that. So it was when I finally allowed the universe, I kind of threw my hands up in the air and just said, you know what, whatever, universe, go ahead, do whatever you're going to do to me, and I was and I'm still cranky about it. Trust me, I'm sure you've seen me rant on Facebook when I get crazy. I'm like, whatever. But knowing, even though you're going through that whatever, knowing that everything's going to be okay, there is that sense of well-being. So we begin to get into the habit of being happy, of being joyful, of smiling, of making other people smile, of being more loving. The more loving and the more smiling and the more embracing you are of people around you, that begins to stick. That becomes your identity. And I don't want to say your identity, but it becomes a part of your day-to-day expression of who you are, and that sense of well-being that comes from the sense of trusting the universe, of trusting that, what you're doing, you're a good person, and that not that you deserve, but you know that you are going to have happiness, that you do have happiness, and to allow that to manifest. Let that come out. Let that be a part of your day-to-day life. We begin to, and because we are feeling this, we begin to appreciate everything. We begin to acknowledge the gratitude we have, even if it's for that moment of happiness. We can't always be happy all the time, okay? That's feeling excited, feeling stimulated, feeling, joyful or whatever all the time and trying to chase that. That's how addiction happens, trying to chase what do they call it? Chasing the dragon. Experience the happiness you have at the moment and allow the next experience to come and know that there'll be another experience after that. Knowing and trusting in the cycle of the universe of gestation, life, death, rebirth. It just, that goes with the cycles of your experience as well. Each experience will crest, and each experience is going to fade back into the wholeness of, the ocean of time or the universe. But with that gratitude, in having gratitude, in acknowledging and tapping into the gratitude for what you do have, also adds to that sense of well-being. Gratitude is something that many of us have to be retaught. How many times, I can't remember. I can't tell you how many times as a child my parents would always say, "Tell them thank you. Tell them thank you." You have to be taught to say thank you. I don't know how many kids have that innately. I know I didn't. But you have to be taught to say thank you. And sometimes we need to reteach ourselves to say thank you. Thank you to the universe. Thank you to the planet for providing us the air, the grass, the trees, our friends, our family, our food, our health, our vision, our hair. Having gratitude for all of these things, when we have that sense of gratitude, that's where that whole childlike wonder, that childlike awe of the universe, like, wow, I have a roof over my head. Wow, those people don't. Wow, I have great hair. Those people don't. Wow, I have friends that care about me. Some people don't. Wow, I have my health. Many people don't have their health. And let me tell you, when you don't have your health and you get it back again, boy, are you grateful. After what I went through last year, I am truly, truly grateful to have my health and vitality back. So relearn gratitude. Allow yourself to relearn gratitude. It's there waiting for you. It is a part of the spiritual awakening process. It is one of the effects. For some, it'll come naturally. For others, we have to kind of edge it along, Another one of the effects of spiritual awakening is we begin to lose our fear of death. Now let me start off with a smaller death. The smaller death of losing your job, losing your home, losing your hair, losing an animal, a pet. We begin to see that this is a part of the cycle. It's a part of the cycle of life, death, rebirth, gestation, life, death, rebirth, gestation. But when we begin to see that everything is energy, that everything is consciousness, that nothing truly ends, nothing ends. Life is a circle. It's not a straight line. Energy is a circle. It's not a straight line. Everything continues. When we die, when our consciousness leaves this body, the consciousness does not die. The physical body may die, but we have proven time and time and again, and actually right now they're doing some great research on the quantum level. I forgot who just put out a wonderful study showing how consciousness does move perhaps to another dimension, they believe. Science is starting to acknowledge that our consciousness might move to another dimension of reality. So if we don't die, if we're not afraid of death, what happens? We begin to have a sense of peace. We begin to lose that fear. What most of our fear, when you think about it on a psychological level, the greatest fear most people have is of being killed or of dying or of not knowing when your death is. Let's face it. Nobody knows when they're going to die. Nobody. I mean, unless they're suicidal, knock on wood. But nobody really knows when they're going to die, and unless they're being killed by a shooting squad or in a genocidal environment. So when we begin to lose that fear, there's a certain peace that overwhelms us, that allows us to live. So trusting in the universe gives us the gratitude, gives us the awareness. It also gives us the clarity to see that our energy doesn't die. Our consciousness doesn't die. We do continue, and we will continue. I'm not going to have much time to go, and I have so much more I can talk about here, but I just want to leave with this last aspect of the effects of spiritual awakening. You know, we're talking about compassion, we're talking about awareness, we're talking about interconnectedness, we're talking about, you know, being one with all, for lack of a better term. And what begins to happen, one of the effects, one of the side effects, one of the goals, one of the symptoms of the spiritual awakening is that separation between others begins to dissolve. I say it all the time. I talk about our one human family. We begin to, the idea of girls and boys, the idea of black and white, the idea of gay and straight, the idea of French and American, the idea of you know, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, begins to dissolve. We begin to acknowledge, and maybe it's through our emotional maturity, that we all realize that we're all living on the same planet. And I don't want to sound cliche, because I'm not being cliche. It is a wonderful feeling when you get this feeling. When you realize that we're all one human family. Our compassion and our empathy gives us the ability to go beyond the left-right paradigm, black-white paradigm, gay-straight paradigm. We don't care about those things. And in not caring about those things, we become more connected with everyone and with everything. Knowing that you are a part of one human family makes you realize that you're never, ever alone. You're never alone. We all have a sob story. We all have problems. We all have joys. We all have happy times. Nobody's really that different. So all that external stuff that is used, by the way, purposefully to divide us, we begin to shut off that nonsense. We begin to understand that this is one human family. This is how we are going to evolve as a species. This is a very, very big aspect of the evolution of humanity, is that step we take into understanding that we are one human family. Imagine the world. Imagine. Well, you don't even need to imagine. We see it on Star Trek or a lot of sci-fi shows where it's, okay, planet Earth, it might be planet Earth versus another planet, but the Earth is one, what do they call it, federation, for lack of a better term. Actually, on the show, that's what they say. But that is the next step in human development and human evolution, is to really embrace the idea we are one human family and to really feel it. And I got to tell you, what a great feeling it is. It really is a great feeling when you don't really hold anything against anybody for no reason. Yeah. Oh my, we're out of time already. Sorry, everybody. Anyway, that went by quicker than I thought. I love you all very, very much. Next week, we are going to have Betsy Lewis here on the show. We're going to talk about the revelations of 7, and maybe I'll finish this talk in a couple of weeks again. Anyway, I'll be back here on Facebook, actually, live Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for a Q&A hangout. I'll see you then. I love you. Bye-bye.